Mini episode 653 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Welcome, everyone, to mini episode 653 of the FDH Lounge. This is FDH Managing Partner Rick Morris, and of course, on the FDH Lounge is the show where nothing is off topic, but once in a while we revert back to our original brand, FantasyDraftHelp.com, for the FantasyDraftHelp.com Insider. Of course, you can get our commentaries during the season here as far as who to play, who to sit every week of the fantasy football season, and this leads us to a discussion of the fantasy football playoffs. We're going to be conducting a special discussion today with a guest that we have joining us. It's Scott Engel, the managing director of Roto Experts, who is also on Sirius XM, the same place you can find my good friend Ray Flowers, a fine channel on the Sirius XM network. And it's a pleasure to be able to have on Scott Engel today to discuss the upcoming fantasy football playoffs. Scott, welcome to the program, sir. Good to have you on. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's that time of year where everybody's starting to overthink things, so we got to talk them out of it.
Well, exactly. And your piece of the New York Post, we'll talk about that. It really struck a chord with me because one of my big gripes that people always tend to do is overmanage, and I thought you struck some very good chords there. Before we get to that, I would like to ask you a little bit about, at this very volatile time for the daily fantasy sports industry, the recent Daily Fantasy Sports Conference in New York. I understand you have some insights on what went on there and what some of the discussions were.
Yeah, I was actually covering it for the Fantasy Sports Network, FNTSY, FantasySportsNetwork.com. I was actually at the proceedings, with Judge Mendez, with the lawyers and everything. And, he said he was going to look at it in discovery when it happened 2 weeks ago. So we're going to wait for his decision. I really thought that the Attorney General side really came off as a group that really didn't know what they were talking about, to be honest with you. I'm not saying just because they're in the fantasy industry. They were reading from a script during the first part of the proceedings, and when they were asked to make the distinction between daily and seasonal, the lawyer for their side said, "Well, seasonal's just about bragging rights. It's not like there's a lot of money involved." And they said, and then the defense came back. FanDuel's lawyers said, "Well, all the time, commissioners are, holding on to fees, et cetera." And then I thought to myself, that I guess they've never done their research about high stakes seasonal like National Fantasy Football Championship, National Fantasy Baseball Championship, et cetera. So I felt like they were ill prepared. I really believe that the defense had a strong case. DraftKings had some really strong lawyers, David Boas and Mr. Mastro. And I think they made at one point the judge said that when you still set your lineup, you're basing it on someone else's skill. But then they drew a good parallel on the fact that, okay, when a general manager is managing a baseball team, he's depending on someone else's skill too. Or when you own a horse too. Once the gate opens, you can't control anything.
Exactly, and I find that kind of shocking, actually, that the Attorney General's office could be so ill-prepared, because it's been my observation for a good period of time here that general fantasy sports, to me, I've always sort of compared it to like a first cousin to traditional gambling, but with daily fantasy sports really being kind of similar, one would think that if that's the argument they're trying to make, that they will be coming in better prepared to be able to do that, because there is that, daily churn on this. There's no long-term strategy involved. There's any number of things it seems like they could have used to make their case, and for them to be reading off a piece of paper, to me, is just shocking.
Yeah, and as far as the comparison with fantasy and gambling, to me, it's not gambling because, and I've said this a lot on the air on the Fantasy Sports Network, is that in essence, you're not gambling because it's not like traditional gambling or any sort of gambling, because in essence you're still creating a fantasy roster. You're still making your own lineup and picking your own players and build something that's like virtual Play-Doh, if you will, and you carry that out into competition with anybody. There's nowhere in gambling that you can do anything like that. It's still your team. It's very truly, as a signature would say, it's very truly yours. And nowhere else can that be replicated in any sort of gambling arena whatsoever. You hear the argument on the gambling side about entry fees, wagers, etc. People say, plain and simple, it's just gambling. Well, the thing is, it's not just plain and simple. This is still really a new industry, and it needs to be recognized as such. And because it's making so much money, people are taking notice. But if they're going to take notice, they really need to study more what it's about. The masses and the general public are now weighing in on opinions, but they're not as formed as people in the industry, who really know the differences.
Well, as far as the form that it's in the last couple of years, that's true. I don't know if you've heard this or not, though. I can tell you, as far back as 2004 out in Las Vegas, I used to see those parlay cards on Sundays where you could assemble what we would now recognize as being a daily fantasy sports team. So Vegas itself has sort of been dabbling in this for a long period of time here. So it does seem like those boundaries in a lot of ways are blurred, and I know they're very blurred in the public mind at the very least.
Yeah, I can't speak to that because, honestly, I've only been a fantasy player. I've never been a gambler. But, knowing the basic, to me, this still strikes me as fantasy because I can still play against you in a head-to-head game on Sunday with our own lineups. And like the defense says, they need to define whether it's a true contest. You're investing in your own contest. You're investing in your own team and your own contest. And, that's what they're saying by the letter of the law, does not make it true gambling.
What's your sense in terms of looking at the landscape right now? It seems like historically, when we look back at the fall of 2015, it seems like it's going to go one of two ways. That either this is the time that with the explosion of advertising before the season and all the attention that it drew, that this is when it truly became on a parallel with the poker industry, and it became clear that they flew too close to the sun, and it's the beginning of at least the end of the peak. There's the one scenario, or the other scenario would be this is a bump in the road. People aren't really, it doesn't seem like the whole argument about everybody using the powerful algorithms out there and the way that people have been beating the system, it doesn't seem like that's dissuading the general public very much. People still love to play state lotteries and everything, so I never thought that argument itself was going to be persuasive. But there's the argument that basically this is a bump in the road. People keep on going. Now, which seems more logical to you at this moment in time?
I think it has to go to trial. I really think, that the Attorney General's office really needs to, find out what this really is about. And at its core, I really, what the defense kept saying, and they were so right, is they have no evidence that this is harming anybody. They were saying that people were showing up in gamblers and the homeless. I'm paraphrasing, but they're saying like people were showing up at more meetings, were addicted to fantasy sports. And I've seen the story or two out there, but they had no evidence to back it up. I don't see how this is harming anybody. I don't see how it's having fun. You made the comparison to states' lotteries. I live here in Queens, New York. I can take a shuttle bus to the casino. I can drive to the track. I can go to the corner store and the corner deli two doors over, and people are like, they're spending a hell of a lot of money on the scratch-offs, which could be just as addictive, if more not, than fantasy sports. So I don't see how it's harming anybody. I think, FanDuel has come out and said they totally embrace regulation, to paraphrase. If you want to regulate it, I'm all for that. To say cease and desist and you can't play it, I really think you need to look at what Massachusetts is doing. I think they have it right. It goes state by state, but I live in New York. I know how hardline New York can be. Maybe this is just a case of, New York wants to get its hand in the pocket. But look, if they're interested in protecting consumers, FanDuel has come out and said, that they're all for that. I don't think there's any reason not to play, though. I don't see where you can define it as true gambling. I see where people may draw some parallels because you put in money and it's a quick hit and a quick return, but it's too different than traditional gambling. It's not like horse racing. It's not like poker. You can draw certain similarities, but when you actually take time to sit down and study it and think about it, I really believe it's his own niche. It's become huge, and if they want to regulate it, I understand that, but it needs to be regulated on its own, and not under the same umbrella as gambling.
Well, regulation, that one would think that would sort of be the common ground, I would think, out there for a lot of people, because as you may have perhaps discerned from one or two of the questions, I'm definitely more of an industry skeptic than you are. But, once we get out of this atmosphere of wild, wild west, no regulation, and ironically, I'm not a big regulation guy in the political realm, but, this does seem to be a pretty good avenue here of showing why it is needed from time to time. And how much do you think, again, it's very, very early, how much do you think when regulations start to get put into place that sort of calms down the backlash a little bit?
I don't know if we can put a timeline on that. It goes state by state. It's almost like when the NFL, if a guy's going to get suspended, I would really be swinging and missing in the dark if I gave you a timeline on that. It's
fair enough.
I'm just waiting for what the judge to see what he says, and I strongly believe it's got to go to trial.
That's a great point. Legal precedent is going to reign very big here, and the first couple of cases that get to trial in the different states here are going to have a lot to say about it, not least of which New York.
I don't think the judge knows enough about it to make an educated decision either. I think that's why he said he's going to look at it in discovery. I really think it needs to go to trial. The one thing that would concern me in the trial, though, it's how much of a what kind of jury are they going to have? You want to have an objective jury, but if they're not well versed enough in fantasy sports, who knows how that's going to go.
Yeah, that's going to be very, very interesting, isn't it? Because if you look at it on the surface, in most of these cases, you're looking for ignorance of the subject matter if you have a jury, or specifically if it's a specific defendant and, somebody that might be prejudiced one way or another on whether or not they did it. But, yeah, you want a jury that doesn't come in with any hard and fast conclusions ahead of time, and yet bringing them up to speed and educating them through the course of a trial does seem like it's going to be kind of a fascinating study in psychology right there. We're going to have to see how that one pans out. But, we're going to be near a tipping point. I have a feeling one way or another in the next couple of months here to see which way it breaks. So I definitely wanted to get your thoughts on the recent conference there. As we approach the playoff season for full-season fantasy football, starting this week for most leagues, unfortunately, I personally am in a league that dates back to the early 90s. I still have to go one more week. We actually play all 17 weeks because in the early 90s, it was not generally tradition at that point to skip week 17 as it is now. But for everybody out there, by and large, this is going to be it this week, the start of the playoffs here. And just in sort of joking sort of internally here at FDH, we've kind of been of the opinion here this year that whoever wins trophies in any of the different leagues out there, and it all seem to come with an asterisk no matter the league. Can you remember a season where there's been so many consequential injuries and ones that have even affected other players? I myself, as a Des Bryant owner, I've not only had to go through his trials and tribulations, but Tony Romo's as well. This season, for most people, it seems like it's been just more of a headache than it's ever been.
Yeah, and first let me say that, week 17, with all due respect, it's like it sounds like you've been doing it for a long time, but I always say, just because you're doing something for a long time doesn't mean that's the way you should do it.
Scott, I can't break them on it. From your mouth to God's ears, I can't break them on it. It's a punchline when I bring it up, because I screech at them and they won't change it. So I'll cite your opinion in addition to mine.
All right. Well, tell them the King said they got to switch. How that go over? Yeah. But yeah, I've never seen a season like this. I mean, it's really wrecked some of my teams, and as a fantasy football expert, people measure you like how you succeed in your own leagues, like kind of a blanket thing, but it's just been so crazy. You know, it's wrecked like a good 3 or 4 of my teams this year. And working the waiver wire has become so important. Just about every running back, except for Adrian Peterson, who still killed people in Week 13, has been a disappointment, a bust, etc. Eddie Lacy, number 1 overall pick in some leagues. Look at the last week and a lot of the year. C.J. Anderson's been bad. Jeremy Hill's only been recently good, and he was a late first-round pick in some leagues. Marshawn Lynch, who was the picture of durability for so many years. And going in, I said, look, I'm still drafting the guy top 5. I'll take the risk because until I'm not going to believe it until I see it. And, okay, we saw it. So I took the chance, and it doesn't always work out. So, but it's just been while it's been a year of really pleasant surprises like Gary Barnidge and guys like that, and Carson Palmer playing like Tom Brady, it's been very, very disappointing in a lot of other respects. I've been doing this professionally since 1997 as a fantasy football expert, an analyst, writer, and whatever you want to call it. This is probably the most unpredictable season I've ever dealt with in all my time in the industry.
It really, really has been. And it's funny you mentioned about Adrian Peterson because that's a point that I've been making recently here. Out of the consensus number 1 running backs coming into the season from a fantasy perspective, he's the only one that hasn't been a disappointment. I managed to get Matt Forte in both of my leagues later in the first round, and I guess maybe he's as close as you come to somebody that hasn't been a big disappointment, but I got a goose egg from him for a good month or so when he was hurt. So it's been seemingly everybody among that upper echelon there, and of course also wide receivers and quarterbacks, and it's interesting too. I know that from your perch, I know that you have more of a 50,000 foot view of the fantasy industry than I do, but I know it's a thing where in up until the last couple of years, anecdotally, I just used to see a lot of crystal ball type crap out there of people claiming to be seers and being able to call things ahead of time. I think there ought to be a $1 billion prize for anybody who can point to a prediction back in August that Charkandrick West and Spencer Ware would be the guys you need if Jamal Charles goes down, because I do a look around the preseason every year, not just at what we're doing, but everybody else, and those are 2 names that I never saw come up from anybody. So you're right about what kind of an unpredictable year it's been.
Yeah, you know what? It goes back to Sam Congato. Like, who would have saw that coming, I think, in, 1998 or I can't remember what year it was, but you remember Sam Congato coming out of nowhere for the Packers, and then you got guys like that, Steve Slayton, who saw that coming. Look, Fantasy Pros does a really nice job of assessing the experts and everything, and I think we all like to pat ourselves on the back. Let's be realistic here, but
sure.
I think we all know when we're wrong too, and I think the best fantasy experts are right 55% of the time. There's a lot that can't be predicted because there's so many variables that happen on any given NFL play. You can't predict execution. You just can't, and you can't predict injuries. Although some guys are tend to have a tendency to be more brittle and injury prone than others, and you should stay away from. But you'll see durable guys go down every year. Like, again, Marshawn Lynch is a great example.
Yep. He certainly is, and that's a guy where, again, he was a tough call coming into the season because, you could see that tipping point coming, but you didn't know if it was going to be 2015 or 2016, and every once in a while you get some cases that are really, really tough to call like that, and again, that's the thing too, and I think the overall thing that in this business, all of us are just kind of doing the best we can. And for as much as I point that out about playing the percentages, I always worry about coming off as sounding defensive or whatever. But, I think that, and again, like I said, anecdotally, I haven't seen it as much in the last couple of years in the tout industry, the notion of people claiming to have a crystal ball or based on, matchups or anything like that. But really, that's all any of us can do is just kind of play the percentages, give an educated guess, certainly, emphasis on the word educated. But as you indicated, there are so many variables that just can't be predicted back in August.
Yeah, and you know what? You can't have a thin skin in this business, and you can't be defensive. It takes as a fantasy analyst, it even took me, time to learn that. And then when you get on a very big platform like the Fantasy Sports Network or something like that, or Sirius XM, the Roto Experts in the morning, you realize that you can't have a thin skin as this stuff, and everybody has a different approach. You respect a lot of the other top experts in the industry, and you give them credit when credit is due. I like to have fun though. Even with my own guys like Jake Steele, who's telling me he'd rather have Richard Rodgers and Vance McDonald right now. I'm telling him I'm not giving credit for that after just one outlier game, and we're having fun with it because in the end we all respect each other. I believe that while some guys are really good at analyzing the numbers, everybody looks at it a different way. I like to watch games and review games, and I believe that any success I've attained or people follow me have attained is because I try to look at the game first and then apply it to fantasy football. I'm not a guy that's going to crunch the numbers first. What I see on the field, if a running back has good vision, if he has good cutback, if what type of routes the receivers run, looking at it like a scout first, and then applying it to fantasy, and then adding the numbers in, and that's basically the way I go about my business.
Very well said. That's the approach that you need to have, and I've always maintained, going back over a long period of time now, that just through happenstance, whatever market or proximity to market somebody happens to live in, they're going to have more insight about what goes on there. You mentioned the name Gary Barnidge earlier. I am cursed to be a lifelong Clevelander and Browns fan. And let me tell you something. You could have knocked me over with a feather when. Thank you. Yeah, you could have knocked me over with a feather when he broke out. Nobody saw that coming.
At least the Miz is from Cleveland, and he's won some championships, right?
He has indeed. Yes. His world championship was the first we've claimed in Cleveland since 1964. But Gary Barnidge. I mean, you could have knocked me over with a feather. I live in Cleveland, and I would have sworn on a stack of Bibles in August that the Browns were going to get no production out of the tight end position after letting Jordan Cameron walk away. So that truly proves what you've been saying about the imponderables here. There will be, and maybe it's cyclical. Maybe 2015 is a weirder year than most, but this has been a year, I would say, where those stories have really sort of been at the forefront.
Yeah, I think Bart is like a terrific example of how things just can't be predicted. Every year somebody comes out of nowhere, and people ask me in the preseason, Scott, who's going to be the next Gary Barnidge, and you just don't see that coming. You just don't, because Josh McCown comes in as a new quarterback, and I can't even remember reports from the Cleveland Plain Dealer that he was looking towards Barnidge in practice. So
right,
you never can tell. These are the kind of things that can't be predicted. Because once they get on the field and they start executing, that's the kind of thing, though, where I said with Cleveland, like everybody was like, I don't want to draft anybody from Cleveland. But the one thing I did say, look, I don't know who's going to come out of it, but they're going to have to throw to somebody. Somebody's going to have to emerge, and you're going to have to keep your eye on it, like that happened with Stephon Diggs for a while in Minnesota.
Right. And that's, Travis Benjamin, to me it was surprising because all these guys here, one of my big gripes as a Browns fan is that they don't have anybody with size and speed on the outside. They got a lot of guys who should be in the slot, and if you look at Travis Benjamin, if you just look at the physicality, he's probably better suited for the slot, but they got to put him in the X or the Z positions there, but he's broken out anyways. He's got that kind of flat-out speed, and he's recovered it since his knee injury. So you're right about that. There's always going to be somebody in a situation, even if you necessarily can't see it ahead of time. That's a great point.
Yeah, it's not everything's predictable in any fantasy sport. Football's different than baseball. Baseball, you can look a lot of track records, et cetera. It seems to be more predictable based on the statistics than baseball. And then, it's like I like playing fantasy NASCAR. My son, Sean, has actually turned into quite a successful daily fantasy NASCAR analyst on DraftKings for what they do. And you can put in the best drivers based on the stats, but nobody can predict a wreck. Yeah, it's more likely to become a Talladega, but you never know when somebody's going to have car trouble.
That's right. I mean, for all intents and purposes, the equivalent of a football player going out of a game with an injury. You can never see that coming, and unfortunately, we saw that way too many times this year.
Yeah, you never know when a guy's going to take a big hit. He's going to go out with a concussion. And that could kill a fantasy season. You know, when we saw Tony Romo, I believe it was like two years ago, just go out. And, you know, I remember one instance with Lynch where when they were still playing under Holmgren, when he was on the sidelines at the beginning of the game and he was activated, and Holmgren said nothing to nobody, and he killed a bunch of fantasy weeks.
Right. Yeah, there's all the coaches out there who seem to be the enemy of the fantasy owners, but by and large, and again, you know, from the course of this discussion, some of the things we've talked about thus far, that's where, again, I think it's always important to emphasize a good, sound process with people, and for them to be able to sort of apply some of the insights that some of us might be putting out there and some insights that they may have intelligently in the course of having a good system. And that goes right to your New York Post article, which, as I say, I thought the main points in here that you were making from a macro perspective, I really, really endorsed personally about not overvaluing matchups. Yes, if guys are close in value, maybe that could be the tiebreaker, but you don't sit your stars this time of year for no good reason, and not to get too hung up on who you're playing against and matching up with them specifically. I mean, I know that to some people it sounds arrogant not to worry about what the other guy's doing, to put out your own team, but you have to have the confidence that if you do everything you can do with your team, and if you've drafted well and accumulated well during the season, that you're going to be just fine regardless of what the other guy does.
Yeah, look, you put enough stress on your own self, especially this time of year, about who to put in your lineup, and you obsess over it at this time of year. And you can't, like we've been talking about all along, you can't control what happens once the game starts. Why are you going to be worried about something that's totally out of your control? And people say, well, if I start Jameis Winston, I'm going to cancel Mike Evans out. You know, that's not going to happen. Well, what if what if Doug Martin rushes for 3 touchdowns? Winston throws 1. It's only for Evans. You can't overthink things. You can't worry about the other side. And I talk about that, you know, in the regular season as well. That's another thing you can't control. All you can do is set your best lineup and know that, you know, try to have the peace of mind, which is very hard to come by in fantasy. Try to have that peace of mind and you set the best possible lineup. And don't over-worry about what you cannot control. You can control your own lineup to a degree, but you can't control the other guy's lineup. If they're going to blow up, they're going to blow up, and that's going to be it. You know, I guess I'm different than everybody else. When I watch fantasy on Sunday, I don't even look at my live scoring until the 4 o'clock games are over. I don't even look at it after the Thursday game because people start whacking out about the Thursday game. Lacy got me off to a terrible start last week. Well, I know people still won their games with Eddie Lacy. 2 weeks ago, I won a National Fantasy Football Championship game with Tony Romo as my quarterback, getting -7 points, 0.7 points. So you can't freak out about Thursday night. Oh, I'm behind, because Eddie Lacy killed me, and the other guy had one other guy going. The one thing I will say, though, there's more limited waiver moves in the playoffs, and I was talking about this today with somebody. If you see that your opponent has a need because of an injury or something like that, and you can go on the waiver wire and scoop that guy up so he doesn't get him, I'm all for that, although I don't do that during the regular season. But I'm for that in the playoffs.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, because that's a way of blocking somebody in a tangible kind of a way and something that you really can control. And it's funny you mention that about the 1 o'clocks because I have the same kind of tendency as well. Sometimes it might be deep into the 4 o'clocks before I look. But for me, it's just the aggravation factor. Since fantasy football, as you well know, it's by far the most luck-driven sport out there, as opposed to sports where we truly have to labor and work to win championships. Luck is sort of at a minimum. So when I see somebody getting lucky against me, the one outburst a year from some scrub off their bench, it just drives my blood pressure up. So just for personal reasons, I tend not to look at those as early as that. And actually, it's been a reverse jinx that's worked well. I haven't had as much of that happening to me recently, which has been nice. But, in terms of heading into the playoffs here, some specific guys on the last 3 weeks here. We'll look at, first of all, quarterback. I mean, aside from, the obvious guys out there. Carson Palmer, we can reasonably expect to do well. Aaron Rodgers, et al. Although it's not a long list this year, it's that dependable, I suppose. Who are some of the guys at quarterback you're looking at for the remaining month?
Well, I got to tell you, the way Russell Wilson is playing right now, ever since they moved Patrick Lewis into center, the line has been giving him great protection. He's playing some of the best pure pocket football I've ever seen him play in his career. Always knocked that he wasn't a good pocket passer. I don't think I never believed that about Russell Wilson. Ben Roethlisberger, the Steelers are just playing incredible offensive football. I believe with that defense, they're not going deep into the playoffs. But there are quarterbacks that you can win your league with. You can stream guys like Blake Bortles, and David Carr's capable of. Derek Carr's having. David Carr's never capable of having a good game. Derek Carr is he's still evolving, and he had a clunker, but I still like him a lot. Jay Cutler, I feel like, still has a pretty good floor, although they've started to run the ball more recently. Eli Manning is too up and down for my taste.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. You never know if it's going to be good Eli or bad Eli, and this is not the time of year you want to be taking that kind of a gamble. I would applaud that sentiment. And at the running back position, who are some guys jumping out at you over the next 3 weeks?
Well, I definitely think David Johnson Jr. I mean, the kid's versatile. He's explosive in the open field. They give him the ball near the goal line, so I'm very excited about that. D'Angelo Williams has been doing a terrific job, but it's almost like at this point, it almost sounds like chalk play because chalk type analysis, because the guys you're talking about is, you got to go with your best players. Devontae Parker now is turning into a wide receiver 3, and Dorial Green-Beckham is starting to look a lot better and playing with a lot more confidence. But can you still start these guys over your proven players? It's at this point, I'm not looking at sleepers. It's those are two guys that are coming on at wide receiver. Austin Seferian-Jenkins is back, which is really nice, especially if you lost Martellus Bennett. But I think a lot of people know who the guys they have to count on are at this point. A lot of people talk about benching. Should I bench Julio Jones because he faces Josh Norman twice? Well, you can't bench your superstars. Maybe you think about a cat. He won't have a huge day, which is what you drafted him for, like a 3-touchdown day or a 2-touchdown day. But I think a lot of people make the mistake of assuming that when a superstar offensive player gets in a matchup with a superstar defensive player, that the superstar defensive player is automatically going to win the matchup. And it's not always that way. That's why you can't bench your fantasy superstars.
Well, exactly. And as Fox Sports' Mike Harmon has pointed out on a couple different occasions on this show, Julio Jones, who you just referenced there, he's a classic example of somebody that can be very hot or very cold for a top-level player. I mean, the Lance Moores of the world, we expect inconsistency. Julio Jones, for a top-level guy, that's a guy that can frustrate you and give you some zeros in there. But as you said, you got to roll with him. You cannot sit anybody that you spent that high of a pick or that percentage of your cap on this time of year if they're healthy. Period. Yeah,
it's that stressful time of year right now. It's you got to dance with the girls that brought you.
Absolutely. And I think that advice is the best of all, and that again, sticking to sound fundamentals. Which is something that we always preach, is something that, again, I was very glad to see that New York Post column, see the thrust of what your advice was on that, because those are the kind of things I think people need to be inhaling right about now, and just kind of sticking to the fundamentals and not overthinking things as we get into the playoffs. But, again, a real pleasure to have a quality fantasy discussion with you today, Scott Engel. Thank you so much, and everybody should go to rotoexperts.com, check out the fine information there. Check them out on Sirius XM. Anything else that I'm missing in the way of plugs here?
Go to rotoexperts.com. Check out my brand new exclusive interview with Odell Beckham Jr.
Very nice. The guy who, I won't say single-handedly, but largely won me my championship a year ago, so I can endorse that. And you mentioned Dorial Green-Beckham, too. It's funny.
Do the guy a favor. Do the guy a favor and tweet at him that he helped you win, because he says he hears a lot of negativity from fantasy players, and we need to tweet more of the positive with these guys, because we can't have a virtual game without them.
Oh, okay. Well, and you know what? And I will make sure to cite you in that tweet, so it's more likely that he sees it. But perfect. He needs to hear that. It's funny you mentioned Green Beckham a second ago here, because that's a guy, I got him in my last round this year, and I was crowing to everybody at the draft that he was going to be my Odell Beckham of 2015. Hasn't quite worked out that way, but as you said, that's a guy that maybe can get a little bit done for you in the playoffs as the Tennessee offense improves.
Yes. Well, thanks for having me, and I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. We look forward to talking with you here on another occasion as things go along. Really appreciate the quality conversation, Scott. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to FDH Lounge mini episode number 653.
As we bring the show to a close, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, all Clear Channel affiliates, TNT, TBS, USA, UPN, Deadspin.com, YouTube.com, YTMND.com, MySpace.com, various blogs, Fox News, CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, IamBoard.com, Billboard.com, Google.com, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPN Classic, NBA TV, NFL Network, Sports Time Ohio, Athlon Magazine, Comedy Central, Cartoon Network, The Boomerang Channel, QVC, BET, The Spice Channel, Steno Notebooks, Manwich, Papermate Office Supplies, waitresses, strippers, bartenders, garbage men, janitors, microwave popcorn, the writers of The Office, Scrubs, Entourage, My Name is Earl, Oz, Metalocalypse and the Boondocks, Aquafina, and the Periodic Table of Elements.